Добрый день, глубоко.
Dear ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, today is the 24th of February 2021, 15:00 Moscow time. Let me, this session of the dissertation committee dedicated to the defense of the dissertation by Iana Alexandrovna Getmanenko, seeking an academic degree of candidate of psychological sciences in the degree field 1904 medical psychology on the topic clinical, psychological and family factors of social adaptation in adult patients with paranoid schizophrenia be open. According to the act of the academic secretary, St. Petersburg University, Alexander Valentinovich Gnetov, dated the 9th of December 2020, number 11116/1. I, Olga Yurina Shelkova, Doctor of Psychological Sciences, acting head of the Department of Medical Psychology and Psychophysiology at St. Petersburg University, was appointed chairperson of this academic committee, and let me introduce the other members of the committee. Olga Valentina Rychkova, Doctor of Psychological Sciences, Professor of the Department of Clinical Psychology and Psychotherapy, Moscow State Psychological and Pedagogical University. Online with us is Natalia Nikolaevna Petrova, Doctor of Medical Sciences, head of the Department of Psychiatry and Drug Addiction, St. Petersburg University. Can you hear us and see us? Yes, I can see you and hear you very well. Vladimir Davidovich Mendelevich, Doctor of Medical Sciences, head of the Department of Medical and General Psychology, Kazan State Medical University. Can you hear and see us? Yes, I can see you very well. I can hear you very well. Thank you. Well, I'm very happy to greet you. The Kukina Tatiana Vasilovna, Doctor of Medical Sciences, Deputy Director for Research of the Republican Research and Practical Center of Psychological Health, Mental Health, Belarus. Can you hear and see us? Tatiana Vasilovna, can you hear us and see us? Everything is good. I can see you and can hear you. I'm very happy to greet you. Of course, present here is the candidate, Iana Alexandrovna Getmanenko, and also her academic advisor, Anna Vladimirovna Trusova, candidate of Psychological Science, Associate Professor of the Department of Medical Psychology and Psychophysiology, St. Petersburg University, to improve the quality of communication. Dear colleagues who are in remote mode connected with us, please switch off your microphones when you're not speaking and switch them off when you're given the floor. I would like to inform you that an audio and video recording is on the way, accompanied by interpreting from Russian to English and vice versa, and it's broadcast live on St. Petersburg University website. There's the website. There's an electronic address to which everybody can send questions and opinions. But these questions and opinions should address the academic discussion and the presentation, and they should be assigned, and the affiliation should be clearly stated. And these questions will be relayed by the technical services to me, and I will read them. All questions that have nothing to do with the academic discussion or the dissertation or the text or the assessment of the dissertation will not be read. I also inform you that in accordance with the procedure of awarding academic degrees of Candidate of Sciences and Doctor of Sciences of St. Petersburg University, then I will refer to it as procedure. As the session of a dissertation committee is deemed legitimate if not less than 2/3 of the established membership of the dissertation committee are present, but not fewer than 4 people. Our dissertation committee consists of 5 people. All 5 people are present, including 3 members of the dissertation committee are in an online interactive mode with us, and we can see and hear them. Therefore, the quorum is there.
Следующий регламент заседания.
Before the following agenda, the following order works is set. The duration of the session will not exceed 2 hours. The first item, a short presentation of the chairperson about the paperwork that has been received from the defendant candidate, and if there are any questions on the paperwork, then I will answer them 5 minutes, not more than 5 minutes. Then a short presentation of the candidate of not more than 15 minutes over the key points of the research. Third, questions to the candidate strictly on the presentation, not more than 2 minutes per question. Then answers of the candidate, not more than 5 minutes for all questions. And then all members of the dissertation committee will take turns to read their reviews and ask questions and make recommendations to the candidate. Not more than 10 minutes per speaker. Then the chairperson will also read her review, and not more than 10 minutes. Then answers of the candidate addressing the questions and the comments of the members of the dissertation committee, not more than 20 minutes. Well, the candidate will be given a choice to reply to questions and comments after each review or after all the reviews have been read.
Далее следует.
Then there's an open floor discussion. All members of the audience can present their opinions and or ask questions. Not more than 2 minutes per speaker. Well, those who are willing to speak must register in the logbook in order to be allowed to speak. And when you speak, you first introduce yourself. Then number 9, then the chairperson will read questions that have arrived through the email, if any. Well, I would like to point out that written questions that take longer than 2 minutes to read will not be read. Then answers of the candidate, not more than 2 minutes per question. Then the academic advisor will have the floor for 3 minutes, and then members of the dissertation committee will discuss their resolution before the open roll call voting. 5 minutes, and the broadcast will be switched off. then open roll call voting, and then the counting votes by the chairperson, and entering the results into the minutes, and then taking a decision not to award or not to award the sought academic degree. Then the concluding statement by the candidates, not more than 2 minutes. Dear colleagues, do you have any questions or objections to the procedure? Well, there are no objections, therefore we'll start going over the procedure. First of all, members of the audience, please switch off your mobile telephones. But those members of the station committee that are in online mode connected to us, please don't switch off your telephones for emergency communication. So, my short presentation of the chairman. The dissertation of Iana Alexandrovna Getmanenko seeking an academic degree of candidate psychological sciences in the academics in the degree field 19004 medical psychology on the topic clinical and psychological and family factors of social adaptation in adult patients with paranoid schizophrenia was received for defense or accepted for defense on the 7th of December 2020. Iana Alexandrovna Getmanenko wrote her dissertation research in St. Petersburg University, advised by the academic advisor, the associate professor of the Department of Medical Psychology and Psychophysiology, St. Petersburg University, Anna Vladimirovna Trusova, PhD, psychology. Well, the number of publications of the defendant that cover key results of the research include 7 works in the Ministry of Science, the Russian Federation, peer-reviewed journals 5 publications, and Web of Science and Scopus 2 publications. The candidate submitted to the academic secretary of St. Petersburg University a full package of documents in order to be accepted for defense. All the documents complied with the procedure. All the documents, according to my information, are filed in the personal file of the defendant, and the copies of which is at the disposal of the member of the Office for Dissertation Committee Management, who is present here. So therefore, before I give the floor to the defendant, do you have any questions? That's my question to the dissertation committee members. Do we need to go over each document submitted? Any questions? Any objections? No objections. No objections. No objections. Thank you very much. Olga Valentin has a small question. Would like to find out your work affiliation at the moment. Thank you very much. I work in psychiatrical hospital named after Skvortsov Stepanov, number 3, as a medical psychologist. Thank you very much. Iana Alexandrovna, thank you for your answer. I'd like to give the floor to you for a short presentation. Dear members of the dissertation committee, I would like to thank you for allowing me to speak before you, and this is a very important moment for me. I'm very nervous, and I would like you to forgive me for that. The topic of my work is clinical, psychological, and family factors of social adaptation in adult patients and paranoid schizophrenia. Modern concepts of schizophrenia as a complex disease of a biopsychosocial nature postulate the importance of the family context, the dynamics of the course of the disease. Most of the time, the patient spends outside the field of the vision of specialists, but with their family, which, according to research, is at the same time an important adaptation resource of the patient and people who are significantly suffering from increased stress and therefore need material, resource, information, psychological support. At the same time, it is known that the greatest burden falls on one of the members of the closest social environment of the patient, who assumed the main responsibilities for the routine support. In English, the term main caregiver is used to denote this person. There's no Russian language analog in the scientific literature, and therefore in this work was decided to use the designation supporting close a close member. Slide 3. Researchers have established the fact of impaired emotional communication in families of parents which in most cases is described by a phenomenon called emotional expressiveness, which consists in the decreased criticism of family members or critical attitude members in relation to patients, and according to studies leads to an increase in the number of relapses. And however, the mechanisms underlying this phenomenon are not well understood. In making assumptions about the mechanisms of increased criticality, I found studies conducted with the participation of relatives of patients with no history of psychotic episodes, which indicated a decrease in emotional intelligence in this cohort, which led researchers to consider it as a component of the endophenotype of schizophrenia. At the same time, the psychological aspect of the problem remains unexplored. We did not find any comprehensive work on assessing the role of reduced abilities to understand and manage the emotions in the immediate environment of family dysfunctions, communication disorders, and dynamics of painful process, whereas difficulties in differentiating and understanding feelings and emotions can significantly hinder interpersonal interaction. The ability to provide adequate emotional support and find its manifestation in the communication disorders and their consequences, characteristic of families with a schizophrenic patient. Thus, I formulate hypotheses about the possible influence of the lack of emotional competence and awareness of the patient's close member on the formation of family dysfunctions. At the same time, taking into account the complexity of such a disease as schizophrenia and the dependence of its dynamics on a huge conglomerate of biopsychosocial factors, an assessment of the role of the family factor in isolation would seem extremely one-sided. Therefore, in this work, it was decided to control the most developed basic factors which, according to research data, are reliably associated with the patient's adaptation capabilities, the severity of symptoms, neurocognitive deficit, and quality of life. The purpose of the study task is shown on the slide. The object of the study is the social adaptation of adult patients with paranoid schizophrenia. The subject of this research is social functioning, quality of life, neurocognitive deficit, balance of the family system, criticality, critical attitude towards the patient, awareness, emotional competence. Research hypothesis. First, social functioning of patients and their quality of life are influenced by the characteristics of cognitive deficits, the severity of clinical manifestation, and the characteristics of the family system in which the patient lives. Second, the severity of the clinical manifestations of schizophrenia is associated with the characteristics of the patient's familial interaction. The degree of awareness of supporting loved one about the characteristics of the patient's mental illness and the ability to provide them with emotional support are associated with the characteristics of their interpersonal interaction. Inclusion and exclusion criteria. It is important I hear that prior to being included in the research, the attending psychiatrist ascertained a reduction in the acute psychotic stages. The research stages are shown on the slide. After passing all the procedures, a final consultation was carried out upon request. Sample characteristics. Attention is drawn to the approximately equivalent gender distribution, the relatively small average age of patients, and the very large percentage of unemployed with a relatively high level of education. As far as this the supporting close person sample characteristics, this is basically a parent, usually a mother, employed with a relatively high level of education, living with the patient. Research methods for the patients, well, they're shown on the slide, well, in detail. For basic analysis, we use statistical methods. Standard statistical methods we used for the baseline analysis to assess the effect of the grouping variable on the distribution of the dependent variables. We used logistic regression, which was characterized by the chi-square statistic. Comparison of indicators with the norm was carried out using the Kolmogorov test. Correlation coefficients were calculated using Spearman's method, and the selection of variables was carried out using the random forest algorithm. Structural equation modeling was done using the Levin library. Results were considered statistically significant when the probability of a type 1 error p was less than 0.05. For statistical processing, the programming language RV 3.6.2 was used. Results of the Thesis method. The analysis was started with an assessment of the severity of family dysfunctions, and it showed a high degree of disharmony in the families under study. The character of dysfunctions is biased towards high disunity of family members and low adaptive capabilities of the family system. By 2 degrees of disharmony, family was distributed relatively evenly, which led me to the idea of looking for factors of intergroup differences. Patients from families of a more balanced type had significantly less severity of negative and general psychopathological systems, and also higher levels of social functioning. There were no differences in the criterion of the severity of cognitive deficit. The overall subjectivity, quality of life, and scores on the scale ability to perform daily activities were higher in patients with more harmonious families. Intergroup differences, according to the Emin method, were found not only on the Managing Your Emotions scale, where patients from balanced families had significantly higher scores. The level of life satisfaction among supportive relatives from medium balanced families were significantly higher. Like EI indicators for most scales of the questionnaire, there were no differences in the level of alexithymia. Differences in awareness were found at the trend level. Supportive loved ones from more balanced families expressed significantly fewer criticisms when interacting with the patient. Based on the results of the analysis of the relation between family cohesion and the clinical and psychological characteristics of the entire sample, it was found that it is associated to a great extent with the individual psychological characteristics of the supportive loved one, whereas family adaptation is more broadly associated with the clinical and psychological characteristics of a supportive loved ones. According to the results, according to the results of the analysis, the relation between cognitive deficit and the patient's social function was found that only 3 Subtests had only a significant relation. Motor tests with chips, fluency, and encryption. And it was this, you can see on this slide that during the optimization process, a model was established to link the variables in a statistically optimal way. It was this model that remained the most stable and underwent additional retests. Next, we tested the hypothesis about the direct competing influence of PB characteristics on the characteristics of the family system, which also showed inconsistency. You see these characteristics of model 4, which means that when we the final model of the relational variables was formulated when we can put together all the models. What you can see these coefficients, which spot is large volume, also retains the statistical significance and stability during retests. Based on the results of the study, the following conclusions were formulated. When recruiting participants in the study using the continuous method, it was found that the majority of patients with schizophrenia being treated in a hospital reported having a supported loved one, a person from the immediate family environment who provided routine support. It was revealed that these persons have a low level of life satisfaction, poor awareness of mental illness, and insufficient ability to provide emotional support to the patient, while these parameters affect the success of the social adaptation of patients. Second, the study obtained data on disorders of family interaction in families of patients with schizophrenia. Families studied are characterized by emotional disunity of family members, which prevents their effective communication, a decrease in the adaptive capabilities of the family system, and the criticality of supportive relatives in relation to the patient.
Балансированный и экстремальный.
According to the parameter of the balance of the family system, only 2 types out of 3 possible ones were identified: medium balanced and extreme. Patients living in more balanced families had less severity of psychopathological symptoms, high levels of social functioning, and quality of life. Supportive relatives of patients for more balanced families showed a high level of life satisfaction, awareness of the patient's mental illness, expressed few criticism when performing experimental tasks, aimed at analyzing the skills of joint problem-solving behavior, and also rated their emotional competence in interpersonal communication. 5. The results of mathematical modeling showed that the level of awareness of mental illness and emotional competence in interpersonal interactions affect the critical attitude of a supportive close relative towards the sick, which in turn the sick person, which in turn is associated with disorders of interfamily interaction and their life satisfaction. Sixth analysis of the obtained mathematical models allows us to assert that the priority factors that determine the patient's social functioning are the severity of psychopathological symptoms, neurocognitive deficit, and the degree of balance of the family system in which they live. In the complex rehabilitation treatment of such patients, work with the family environment becomes extremely important. The format of work with groups of family members most involved in caring for the patient, proposed on the basis of the results of the study, focused on raising awareness about the features and the disease and emotion competency interpersonal interaction, seems to be a more promising methodologically sound model of psychological support. Thank you very much for your attention. Dear colleagues, members of the dissertation committee, do you have any questions on the presentation? Any questions from members of the committee? Well, I have a question. Vladimir Davidovich, please. Can you hear me? Yeah.
большое.
Thank you very much. Do you understand correctly
Что выбор группы исследований,
that the choice of a group of studies
исследовательная компетенция, и даже они переносили психические расстройства в анамнезе.
Владимир Давыдович, я прошу...
Vladimir Davidovich, unfortunately, your question is not clear because the poor connection. What does the candidate understand? Did you understand? Unfortunately, I didn't hear the big part in the middle. Vladimir Davidovich, could you repeat your question, please? We'll try. I will speak slowly. Your hypothesis that in paranoid patients they had a lower emotional competence. I will try to answer it. But supportive close ones didn't undergo psychotic episodes, and this was the criteria that to exclude participants from the study. As far as the lower ability of emotional support, I was based my study was based on the presumption of psychological health of the supportive ones, and yes, and the study did find that emotional competence was lower. Are you satisfied? Yes. Thank you very much. Any questions, colleagues? Any other questions? Olga Valentinovna, please. Just as a follow-up to the previous question by Vladimir Davidovich. I'm interested in this topic. You said that there was a criterion of exclusion. Well, your work is unique because there are very few studies of assessing a close one, a supportive close one. Tatiana M. There was a work on codependence, but they had she had a devastating or terrible picture at the end. So, but when you excluded someone, when you looked at the people, were there many psychological problems or even psychiatric problems in the supportive relatives? When I worked individually with every supportive member, I asked them if they have ever sought psychological psychiatric help, but all the people said no. According to the indicators of psychology of emotional interact, and they were at the lowering effect was at the low boundary of the norm. but we had to work with the supportive and relatives we had access, and sometimes they were not blood relatives, and endophenotype was part of my reasoning. Olga Valentinovna, are you happy? Any other questions? No. Then Iana Alexandrovna, I would like to ask a question.
У него ответ, но в то же время, чтобы
To receive an answer, but also I would like to put in it my assessment of the questionnaire about mental illness, and this was a very good questionnaire, and very good for clinical psychologists and that work in psychiatry. Very good formulations, and in the introduction of your thesis you state one of the theoretical and methodological foundations of your research. There's a biopsychosocial model of schizophrenia, but in the instructions to the questionnaire that there can be only one right choice to every question. And I would like to ask, how do you answer correctly question number 8? Schizophrenia, as a rule, develop as part of A, biological reasons, B, ecological reasons, family situation, the personal traits, and the last one, the impacts of society. So what's the right question? The answer. When I put together my questionnaire, I was based on our foreign colleagues, Kashe and Kas. They developed, and the most correct answer in this is biological reasons. As a person who works in the first line care, I was inclined to choose the biological reasons, because we had very little time to work with the supportive loved ones and the patients, and therefore they needed to understand that the biological reasons are very, very important, very strong, and in group consultations and in individual consultations we do discuss that, and it's very important. Thank you very much, Iana Alexandrovna. Dear colleagues, no more questions, as I understand. Therefore, we will give the floor to the committee members with the questions and criticisms and assessment of the station. The candidate will answer your questions right after each review.
Пожалуйста.
Dear Natalia Nikolaevna, I would like to state that there's a remark. Since all the reviews have been published on the website, then you can only concentrate on the key points of your review, rather than read the whole review. Please. Thank you very much. I would like to stress the relevance of the research, which is in demand by practitioners in the rehabilitation of and socialization of inclusion of patients with schizophrenia, and there's to focus on this the family and so family environment makes this work unique. The study focused on the family factors that influence this in social adaptation of schizophrenic patients, and to formulate the clear tasks. A design of studies was put together, and that included the quality of life, emotional, communicative abilities of patients, and of course pathological traits, and very important it's important to inform the relatives and to see how they critically assess the patient. The work has valid conclusions. The number of publications show that statistical treatment is a very important part of the research, and it allowed the candidate to build a multiple factor model to analyze the social adaptation of patients with schizophrenia. The data allowed the author to prove the hypothesis.
Возможности функционирования пациента детерминированы.
And well, the emotional personal characteristics are important of the supporting close member. The originality of the methods allowed the author to come up with a unique data of the characteristics of supporting relatives or close ones, and this mathematical model allows to optimize family interventions geared to readaptation and the support of family members. Well, the practical significance of the work is obvious because the findings actually have found their way to clinical practice already. This work is of very high significance because it was done by the candidate in their workplace. The results of the dissertation are published in seven journal articles, even Scopus, Scopus. My questions. You said that the analysis of the obtained mathematical models allows us to reassert that the priority factors that determine the patient's social functioning are the severity, psychopathological symptoms, neurocognitive deficits, and the degree of balance of the family scene, and also that patients living in more balanced families had less severity of psychopathological symptoms, high levels of social functioning, and the quality of life. Well, well, there are many studies that show different effects of negative and productive symptoms of schizophrenia on the social functioning of patients and the burden of the family. In addition, the ratio of negative symptoms and neurocognitive deficit as factors of social functioning of patients with schizophrenia is ambiguous, is quite controversial. The differentiated assessment of the influence of the psychopathological symptoms and neurocognitive functions on the social function of the examined persons requires clarification. The second question has to do with that in the study social functioning was assessed at the stage of inpatient treatment using the PSP, Social and Personal Functional Scale. For how correct is this? Can you provide arguments for question? Well, the questions don't diminish the high value of the dissertation, and the dissertation of Iana Alexandrovna corresponds, meets the requirements of the procedure of awarding academic degrees in St. Petersburg University, and the candidate Iana Alexandrovna Getmanenko deserves to be awarded an academic degree of candidate of science in medical psychology. Iana Alexandrovna, please answer Natalia Nikolaevna's questions, please. I would like to answer my questions together with showing the model. The main objective of the study was to study the role of familiar factors, of family factors, of schizophrenia and the characteristics of a supportive loved one in the social adaptation of patients. However, I assume that the role of cognitive deficits and the severity of symptoms may be much more significant against the background of the family factor, which in principle would mean that there's no need for family interventions in terms of the patient's social functioning. When constructing the final model, the factors of neurocognitive deficit and the severity of psychopathological symptoms were considered in a simplified form with the extraction of latent factors in order to confirm or refute the formulated assumption. Indeed, the question of the relation between variables such as social functioning, cognitive deficits, and the severity of symptoms is not fully resolved, and research in this area continues, but as a direction for future research for more differentiated response, a large number of respondents and an additional set of clinical variables such as volitional impairments, social cognitive functions, the level of distress, and antisocial attitudes are needed, which was not a priority for my work. The mutual arrangement of the variables presented in the work is the result of testing a large number of hypotheses to establish the most qualitative model. Indeed, the second question, my answer is indeed the assessment of the patient's social function was carried out at the stage of inpatient treatment, and it was the scale of social and personal function of the PSP that made it possible to make the appropriate measurements. Since its validation, according to the original research, but Morosini PL was carried out in conditions of patients being in cohabiting rehabilitation centers. Moreover, in order to eliminate possible inaccuracies in the assessment, the technique was carried out strictly at the stage of stabilization of the state in the absence of pronounced psychotic experiences. Natalia Nikolaevna, are you happy with the answers? Yes, I am happy. Thank you very much. Then I would like to give the floor to Tatiana Vasilyevna Kukina. Tatiana, do you hear us? Dear colleagues, can you hear me? Yes, please. There's huge work with schizophrenic patients. There are two directions as the treatment and presenting and creating a comfortable environment. A medical psychologist plays a vital role in the second. And there are many studies abroad that have to do with family environments, and for example, in burnout that focus on burnouts, but Iana Alexandrovna didn't repeat the published works. Her work is absolutely original, and because Iana Alexandrovna studied the aspects that to logically validate the necessity to work with the family environment, and a direction for such work is outlined. The practical significance of the work is also obvious. Dynamic consultation was carried out by the researchers, as far as I understand. Then there's psycho-correctional work already in place when you did these consultations, and very well chosen methods to study the supportive members of the family, and the data is very representative. The practical significance lies in the fact of that a questionnaire was developed, and the dissertation has no drawbacks in terms of the language and the formats. The goals that have been set have been achieved. Therefore, I will ask only two small questions, and I will just end that the dissertation deserves the third degree. Well, what criteria was the author guided by when choosing the image technique by Lucin as a tool for assessing the communicative competence of patients and supporting relatives? And second, what explains the high dropout rate of supporting loved ones from the study? Are there any design options that would help reduce it? Because there will be more strong ties, but nevertheless, my conclusion is that the dissertation of Iana Alexandrovna Getmanenko on the topic clinical, psychological, and family factors and social adaptation in patients with paranoid schizophrenia complies with the requirements of research works and that are submitted for the degree of Candidate of Sciences, and therefore candidate Iana Alexandrovna Getmanenko deserves the third degree of Candidate of Psychological Sciences in Medical Psychology. Thank you very much. dear Tatiana Vasilyevna, Iana Alexandrovna, thank you very much. Thank you very much for your questions and recommendations. One of the questions that I have been trying to solve when developing the design is the question of choosing between a mixed model and a model of ability in assessing EI. The model of ability is presented by the Mayer, Salovey, and Caruso definitely has advantages. The test is based on the original model of emotional intelligence and is widely used in research, which would potentially allow a more complete comparison with results with the data of other research, and consists of a large number of different experimental tasks. The Russian-speaking authors are carrying out a colossal work on adaptation and validation of the method, which was not fully completed at the time of the beginning of the study, and the information stored in the public domain was not sufficient for an adequate interpretation of the results. Moreover, the MSCEITV 2.0 test is extremely laborious to conduct, which together with all the other quality laborious research procedures significantly increases both the time of joint experimental work from 2 to 4 hour sessions and the level of psycho-emotional stress on patients weakened by a past psychotic episode and their supportive relatives experience a stressful situation of hospitalization of a relative. And these factors served as the basis for the choice of tools built within the framework of a mixed self-assessment model, which among which Lucian's Emin method favorably differed in its simplicity and accessibility in conducting a small number of gradations of answers on the Likert scale, and a convincing model of emotional intelligence intersected with the views such well-known researchers in this field as Gardner and Bar-On, as well as high internal-external validity. Second, an analysis of the reasons for the refusal of supportive loved ones, which I was able to record, 38 units, made it possible to conclude that the most frequent of them were references to to busy schedule, work schedule, both at work, 23 people, and in connection with the need to resolve everyday issues, and rising as a result of the patient's hospitalization, help with children, repairs, etc. 11 people. It is noteworthy that only 4 people openly expressed their lack of interest in working with specialists. Can be added that over the entire period of the study, about 15% of supporting relatives postponed appointments, referring mainly to other commitments. This observation made it possible to conclude that objective conditions were the main factor in leaving high load on supportive relatives, which did not always turn out to be compatible with the time-limited schedule of the inpatient visits. Therefore, applying the design in an outpatient mental health service setting with more enrollment options would presumably increase the number of respondents participating. On the other hand, if we talk about psychological factors and take into account the stressfulness of the very fact of the patient being in hospital for the whole family, as well as the still dominant perception of psychiatry in society through the prism of outdated stigmatizing myths, a longer and more focused on the needs of a particular family, primary specialist consultation could potentially be a factor in reducing emotional tension and increasing commitment to research. An indirect confirmation of this assumption can be provided by the already existing family intervention programs. Thank you very much. Tatiana Vasilyevna, that you are satisfied with the answers? Yes. Thank you very much. Now I'll give the floor to Rychkova Olga Valentinovna. Colleagues, I cannot help saying that I enjoyed the focus of the work on the supportive close one, and this is of principal importance. And this already is enough for the dissertation to be valuable. But there are very many other points that are very interesting. I like the way the researcher emphasized the shift from the relative looked at as the source of this schizophrenia to the burden on the family who supports a schizophrenic patient, and this is very valuable. Well, the relevance of the goals, of course, is certainly there. I enjoyed the use of standard psycho assessment and psychological procedures and mathematical treatment, very methodical and very consistent. This provides for the validity of the results. The originality of the work leaves no doubt, because this certainly provides for substantiation of this comprehensive analysis of family environment, and the practical significance is very high, because the idea of practically working with and organizing this assistance to the family in the process of rehabilitation after a psychosis. I have no critical remarks to the structure, but I have some questions on the work as a whole. The first, in this work, the author uses terms such as emotional competence, communicative competence, and the ability to provide emotional support in relation to the characteristics of supportive loved one. Are these terms synonymous in the context of the study? If not, which of them most fully describes the evaluated phenomenon? It is possible to confidently speak about these characteristics based on the results of self-report. Did the study take into account the regulatory component of emotional intelligence? The second question I would really not like to answer, because you've answered it already. Because this is about relatives' psychiatric or psychological dysfunction of the relatives. You answered this question. You said that in the work you saw that there's a misconception of the relatives of the condition of the authors. Was it maybe a protective coping method to accommodate this situation? And how do you intervene there? And I would like to paraphrase the relationship between and exact ideas about the disease. In the final model of the relationship with variables, the established relationship are predominantly one-sided, while the relationship between the symptoms of schizophrenia and neurocognitive deficit is bidirectional. Well, on the whole, the dissertation of Iana Alexandrovna completely complies with the requirements, and therefore the candidate deserves the sought degree of the candidate of sciences in psychology, medical psychology, to be awarded to her. Thank you very much, Olga Valentinovna. Iana Alexandrovna, could you answer the questions, please? Thank you. The terms communicative competence and the ability to provide emotional support are broader and appeared only once in the work in cases when they are simultaneously meant a combination of two characteristics measured in the study, namely criticality, criticism, and data obtained on the scale of interpersonal EI methodology, mean. Within the framework of the model of emotional intelligence by Lucian, the interpersonal component of EI is understood as the ability to understand the emotional state of a person on the basis of external manifestations of emotions, combined with the ability to evoke certain emotions in other people and reduce the necessity of unwanted emotions. However, this term is not quite well established, therefore in the present study it was decided to use more cautious formulations, emotional competence in interpersonal relationships, in order to observe additional caution in the conclusions and view of the self-assessing nature of the methodology used. The wording supporting relatives rated their emotional competence into interpersonal interaction high appears to the question of the applicability of self-assessment techniques for assessing ER. The author, Lucian, answers the example of A. Bandura's studies, which show that self-efficacy, i.e. ideas about one's own effectiveness, is associated with real performance, from which the author concludes that a person's ideas about his or her EI and their confidence in their competence in the area to some extent reflects their EI. An additional advantage of EMIN methods is the fact that EI is understood as the totality of an individual's abilities independent of personal characteristics such as empathy, self-control, tendencies to self-analysis, etc. Evaluation of the regulatory component EI in this study was carried out at its first stages, where it was found the patients living in more balanced families had higher scores on the scale of managing their emotions, and from PV from such families had higher scores on the scale of control of other people's emotions. But the final model of the interconnection of variables included only the scale interpersonally high, most very reliably associated with the patient's social functioning, which combines both the ability to understand and control emotions of others. However, the observation opens up the prospect of further research on the emotional competence of interpersonal relationships. Thank you very much, Iana Alexandrovna. I'm sorry. Yeah. The second question about the distortion. The distortion, most often erroneous answers were encountered in questions related to the prognosis of the disease, the duration of treatment, and the necessary actions in case of a worsening of the mental state. Thus, the analysis of the averaged responses of the sample does not allow us to conclude that there's some common leading defense strategy, coping strategy. But if we consider this issue from the point of view of organizing interventions, then in practical work with the family member, one has to face the problems of avoidance, denial of the fact of the disease, and the underestimation of its severity. Reactions of the catastrophizing type, taking on excessive responsibility for the patient, are also common, and in this case the use of dry information and the development of specific skills may indeed be insufficient. In this case, at the first stage of the work, it seems important to introduce a more individual, personalized approach aimed at emotional support, acceptance of responsibility, and the correction of maladaptive patterns of coping behavior. As far as the speed factor, the questions of the relation between cognitive deficit and the severity of symptoms is still the subject of academic discussion, and there are opposing points of view. The social there are three subtests that has to do with it. The common non-specific factor is the dynamic characteristic of the process. Therefore, it's called backspeed factor, based on the general structural and functional models of the brain by Luria. These disorders may be associated with the failure of the functions of the first energy block of the brain. Thank you very much. Iana Alexandrovna, Olga Valentina, are you happy with the answers? Yes. Thank you very much for your clarifications. As far as the first functional block, I would not be so categorical. And thank you very much. Vladimir Davidovich, your turn, please. I will, if I need to interrupt you for technical break. I'm very sorry. I hope that there will be a good connection. And dear colleagues, the topic that the author of the dissertation and her advisor are both practical and theoretically bottomless topics. Drug addiction studies looked at this in focusing on codependence between the relatives and the drug addict, and focus on the reaction of the patient. When you looked at patients with schizophrenia, it's even more difficult mechanism, more complex mechanism that influences the quality of life and the mental state of the patients. I'm not going to read the whole review. I will just have to look at you, with you, and at how this research illuminates the social relationships. I like the work, methodologically very sound, great mathematics, great literature review, very commendable. But this work deserves a very close study, because you can take it as a starting point in many different types of research. The questions remain for me are very important when we talk about biological disease. Well, we heard a question about the questionnaire, but the methods of psychological work that is presented are not geared not at the biological, but not not at the pharmacological component, but this relationship with the loved one, supportive loved one. But there's also another member in the context is unsupportive member of the family. Well, what about other members of the who are not solution to the problem but part of the problem? When we work in drug addiction or psychiatry, there are worsening factors that stem in the family. Well, there's a system. Family is a system that that are that's very hard to calculate. And where is the supportive component? Where is worsening? Well, another thing that's more important for me, that is a fact, as include in 75 mothers are compile 75% of the supportive members of the family. And if we look at the patient unfortunately, there can be very unharmonious relationships between the child and, and the mother from the very beginning. For example, relatives, and very often the person who recognized this disorder actually was the one that contributed to this person ending up in the psychiatric hospital. We see here is the informing of a supportive loved one. What symptoms talk about what? About the worsening? Not. This is that what you see in the patient is not laziness, but apathy. Can better awareness help in improving the relationships between the supportive member of the family environment and the patient? Iana Alexandrovna described beautifully 3 models, but I would like to introduce a 4th model. If we, for example, a supportive member of the family is the doctor of psychiatry, medical doctor and psychiatrist, very well informed, but their relationship with their child, is it an enabling relationship for adaptation, preventing adaptation, or indifferent? This is a unique. It would be unique research. For example, akin to studying mental patients that are psychiatrists themselves. What about bipolar affective disorder or neurotic disorders? If we look at them, we compare to see whether this model of interacting is unique to schizophrenia or cuts across different mental disorders. I like the models, as I said, and that there are some weaknesses of interconnection, and then some others serious correlations. Well, this is I would like to ask now several questions, although you answered one question about exclusion or dropping out. What's the percentage? 85 pairs. How many dropped out? When I looked at 370, yes, then I thought, oh wow, and then I understood that half of it, or less than half of it, is a translation into English. If you and then well, after you answer my question, I think if you can make your conclusion And then Iana's your conclusion of your review, and then Iana Alexandrovna will answer your questions. Well, my formal conclusion is that the dissertation of Iana Alexandrovna Getmanenko deserves to be the basis for awarding an academic degree of kind of psychological sciences to Iana Alexandrovna Getmanenko. Thank you very much. Your answers, Iana Alexandrovna. The percent of the dropouts, about 15%. The relatives, after the patient, they worked with the patient. Well, the supportive loved ones didn't want to participate because of being busy with other things. 38 refusals. Well, I was concerned with the dropouts in the context of organizing family intervention for family and specialists in an optimal way. In this regard, I analyzed the data of clinical psychological study of all 245 patients eligible for the inclusion and exclusion criteria. Well, no significant differences were found between the clinical and psychological characteristics of patients whose supportive loved ones went through all stages of the study, and patients whose supportive ones refused to participate in the study. That allowed us to put forward a hypothesis about the existence of other factors associated with the refusal to participate in the study. Analysis of the reasons of the refusal of supportive loved ones made it possible to conclude that the need to support materially the patient were most prevalent. Thank you very much. Vladimir Davidovich, are you happy with the answers? Yes. Thank you very much. Dear colleagues, members of the Station Council, I am very grateful to you for your reviews. My review is formalized. I would like to formalize the dissertation because it's necessary for a defense. I would like to point out the relevance of the research is based on the use of current person-centric and adaptation paradigm of psychiatry, as based on a psychosocial approach to understanding the health and disease of a person, and modern models of schizophrenia, as part of which the family environment, especially the family stresses, are given the priority place as factors of the development of and the course of schizophrenia. The clinic, the patient is studied in the context of clinical symptoms of the illness, clinical psychological characteristics of the patient, individual psychological characteristics of the supportive close member of the family, and the character of their relationship. And this is all combined in one picture. This methodological approach and the design and the relevant design of the research differed in a good way from other works in this area, and make it very relevant and original. That opens up avenues for psychological assistance to personalized psychological assistance to the patients and their families who carry the burden of the treatment. Well, we all saw the slides. The goals were there. 6 tasks were formulated, and they were all achieved. And that allowed to substantiate the hypothesis about the influence of the social functioning of patients, or the influence on the social functioning of patients of different factors that has to do with pathology and cognitive deficit and the family system.
Близкого психического.
And therefore, this family relationship factor in very importantly, and to improve these relationships, you have all the family members should be aware of the details of the disease and be able to support them emotionally. Modern techniques and theories were used in developing a criteria to include or exclude respondents in experimental groups of patients and supportive relatives, and also methods of research, among which 5 psychometric instruments for patients and 5 methods for supportive relatives, and also importantly a questionnaire of awareness about mental disease has been devised. 7 conclusions were formulated, and the defended statements reflect the theoretical significance. And of course, the originality is reflected in the empirical parts of the dissertation, of course, on the basis of the analysis of contemporary Russian and foreign literature, psychosocial models of schizophrenia, and the role of the close social environment are highlighted, and therefore recommendations on the consultations and informing the relatives of schizophrenia are made. 50 pages of the first chapter includes an analytical overview of the literature, and in itself it is a complete work. And also the same thing can be said of the chapter discussion of the results of the study. In the detailed empirical study, the author is uniquely, for the first time in the theory, sets a complex of factors that define the level of social adaptation of schizophrenic patients. That includes psychopathological symptoms, cognitive deficits, balanced character of the family system, and the emotional disunity of members of the family, their low communicative confidence, etc. And of course, there are recommendations about psychotherapeutic targets to work with the family of a patient. The practical significance has already been discussed, therefore I will not dwell on it. Iana Alexandrovna is an erudite practicing psychologist and a talented researcher, because in addition to her working as a medical psychologist in a hospital, she also went through a doctoral study period, and she combined these two capacities, and this is reflected in the research work. So the practical relevance is obvious. Structure of the completeness of dissertation I will not dwell on either, and I will just say that the number of sources is 243, 202 in foreign languages, out of which I have no substantial criticisms. I will just say that clinical examples could augment and illustrate better the results of the study. But this criticism does not in any way diminish the value of this dissertation, because this topic is understudied, and this work will be sought after by clinical psychologists. And just to point out that the wonderful language and the how time-consuming the study was. Just to conclude, that candidate Iana Alexandrovna Getmanenko deserves the right to be awarded an academic degree of Candidate of Sciences, and her dissertation totally meets the key requirements on the procedure of awarding academic degrees in St. Petersburg University, and the sought degree should be awarded to Iana Alexandrovna in medical psychology. Thank you very much. Iana Alexandrovna, if you want to react to my critical remarks, small critical remarks. Thank you very much. Some clinical examples were cited in my qualification research paper, but I was too worried about exceeding the volume of the dissertation, and so I should have included it. Thank you very much. Dear colleagues, as far as I understand, there are no external reviews, so therefore we will not read anything there. So please. Thank you. Dear colleagues, and not only those who are present here, but who are not members of the dissertation committee, do you have any questions or comments? No takers for this opportunity? Then I would like to read the questions that have been received by email. There are questions from Khabibulina Violetta Maksutovna.
Поскольку надо
Because you, Violetta Maksutovna, didn't include. This is not the first time. She has sent in questions. We know of her affiliation and academic status. Violetta Maksutovna, candidate of biological sciences. Unfortunately, Violetta Maksutovna, last time you gave your other affiliations, MSW, MPH. Answer the questions. Preamble. Since the questions unfortunately I couldn't see the slides. My questions is on the sampling. You talked about throughout sampling, how many pairs were excluded, how many pairs were studied, and on which criteria did you exclude? Out of the excluded pairs, how many pairs were excluded because of the patients, and how many were the supportive family member? 5 questions. Yes, I'm happy to answer the questions. First question of Violetta Maksutovna. Thank you very much for the question. Out of 245 patients that met the criteria of inclusion, 229 signed the informed consent. 211 filled out the questionnaire independently, and 21 134 confirmed that they had a supportive one. 37 said that they lived on their own, and they didn't have constant support. Out of 12, 111 and 93 turned up for the study. And I side with the comments of the comments of related diagnosis in the relatives. Did you exclude such family members? And there's only one person was excluded. He didn't. He couldn't fill out the questionnaire, and in a personal conference, he confirmed the diagnosis. And what was the? Where did you receive approval of the protocol for the study from a medical organization? Thank you very much. This sampling was done from 2017 to 2019 when I worked in my hospital before the pandemic, when visitations were allowed, because otherwise I was allowed to do this study by Mechnikov University. I don't have the number, but I have the date. Thank you. It's easy to track it. You mentioned about the statistical treatment of there. I heard the English R. This is not a statistical method. It's like a programming language. There are other programming packages for statistics, SAS, Statistica, Excel, etc. So it's important to understand what statistical methods exactly you used for each task. What statistical methods did you use? If these are statistical methodologies, what statistical methods were used? Yes. Well, maybe the presentation maybe wasn't clear in the broadcast. I just put up the slide with the statistical methods. I used percentiles, medians, categorical variables were described in ultimate numbers. Statistical regression was used, and then criteria of Kolmogorov were used. The algorithm of a random forest was used, and as the models are CFI, SRMEA, SRMER. So the environment is indeed R. Thank you very much. You said you mentioned the original mathematical models. What questions lie at the basis of this model? How did you convert into statistical methods your final model? Did you compare your results with other similar studies? Again, I put up this model on the screen. The whole chapter number 4 talks about this. The results are satisfactory and compatible with the foreign colleagues' results. The main thing for me in this model that the family factor has a significance for the social functioning of the patient. The awareness and the ability to support emotionally is of critical importance. And on the slide there are coefficients of the models that allow to identify the directions of these connections. Unfortunately, Iana Alexandrovna, I cannot ask Violeta Maksudovna whether she is happy with the answers. When members of the Station Council have heard them, and they will factor them in when deciding on the resolution.
Предоставить слово научному.
I would like to give the floor to the academic advisor, Anna Vladimirovna Trusova, Associate Professor, Candidate of Psychological Science, the Department of Medical Psychology. Dear members of the Station Committee, I have an honor to speak before us and to characterize Iana Alexandrovna. And I had the honor of being advising her on this. This has been a magic that has transformed my life, and I've observed a young practitioner and scholar growing up in front of me. This is a great experience. Iana, for these years, have come a long way, full of findings and concerns and worries and concerns that anxieties that made Iana question her findings, how to connect different phenomena, what the data mean for the patient, for their family, and for the medical psychologist who can support them, the patient and the family. And the ability of Iana to put these questions and analyze and go further, incorporate different data, has always impressed me. I think this is a very erudite young researcher, very with great potential. When we started out, I could say that we developed the research together, but then the further the work went, I just stood back and let her work on her dissertation. And she is not only a scholar but a great practitioner. It's hard to combine research and practical work, but I hope that she will continue doing so, because this is in her work, she does it brilliantly. And I would like to thank the committee for the scrupulous look at the work. Thank you very much. Dear colleagues, since our session has remote distance component, I have to ask this question. Does any of you have questions as to the technological parts of our session that has to do with the remote mode of work? Maybe any other external questions? As far as I understand, no. If there's been more emails, then they would have given them to me. Then, in this case,
Совета, вопрос только к вам.
my question to you, we have the opportunity to, before we vote, we can call a break and switch off the broadcast to deliberate. Do we need such a break? Colleagues? No, we don't need any. Don't need any. Olga Valentin, no. Then thank you very much for your answers. In this case, we continue. Then I call an open roll call voting. Every member of the station committee has to openly state their vote. I put to the vote of awarding Iana Alexandrovna Getmanenko an academic degree of candidate of psychological sciences in the academic degree field 19.00.04 medical psychology. I remind you that the decision of a dissertation council, dissertation committee on awarding an academic degree can be deemed positive if more than half of the dissertation committee, but not fewer than 3 members of the dissertation committee that participate in the will vote. Natalia Nikolaevna Petrova, I support the resolution to award the candidate of sciences degree in medical psychology to Iana Alexandrovna, member of the committee, Olga Valentina Rычkova. Your opinion, please? I support, and I also would like to say that Iana Alexandrovna Getmanenko deserves this degree to be awarded to her. Tatiana Vasilyevna Dakukina, your opinion? I vote for the awarding of the degree in medical psychology to Iana Alexandrovna Getmanenko. Candidate of psychology science in medical psychology. Do you agree? Yes, I agree. Thank you. Vladimir Davidovich Mendelevich, I totally support. I vote for the awarding of a candidate of sciences degree in medical psychology to Iana Alexandrovna Getmanenko. Thank you very much. I also side with my colleagues, and I vote for the and I think that Iana Alexandrovna Getmanenko deserves the third degree to be awarded to her in our degree field. Therefore, the voting yields the following results. I would like to declare that out of 5 members of the station committee who participated in the voting, 5 members voted in favor of the awarding of the degree. No abstentions, no nays, and the decision to award Iana Alexandrovna Getmanenko an academic degree of candidate of psychology says in 1904 medical psychology degree field has been taken. Dear colleagues, because we have some members of this station committee in an online mode with us, do you have any objections to the procedure of the session? I would like to receive an answer on the procedure from every member of the Dissertation Council. Objections? Natalia Nikolaevna? No objections about to the procedures. No objections to the Tatiana Vasilyevna? No objections to the procedure. Olga Valentina, just the contrary. How wonderfully everything has been organized. Thank you very much. I have no objections either. Only gratitude to the organizers.
Дорогая Яна Александровна,
Dear Iana Alexander, you're given the floor for a concluding statement. Thank you very much, dear colleagues, dear members of the Dissertation Committee. It's a very important moment for me. Hard to express my gratitude. Thank you. Thank you. Great. Thank you. Congratulations, the defendant. And the session is declared to be closed. Thank you for the participation, and like to switch